God, God works in patterns, and he works in seasons, and he works in ways. So we tend to find that one pattern is usually a sort of, you look back and you see a bigger pattern made up of that pattern. So, I was looking at particularly the US when I had that revelation. I was in the temple in heaven, and essentially I engaged the seraphim. The seraphim looked at me quite intently as if I should be knowing what I'm doing. And I didn't. I didn't really know what I was doing, but I was there anyway. And I responded, and I saw this golden bow and arrows, and I fired the things, and ended up seeing that when I looked up, I saw these maps around the world, or around the way this place was. They were maps. Some of them were maps I recognized. Some of them were maps I didn't recognize. They were dimensional maps. But this one I recognized, and I felt inclined to fire the arrows at the map. And so when I'd finished, it looked like that picture. Amazing. So then I sort of, oh, well, what does that mean? Why have I done this? And I felt compelled to say, well, here am I, send me, which is Isaiah's response to being in the temple and having the coals of the altar. And so I'd engaged the seraphim, and I felt inclined to say, well, here am I, send me, not really having any idea what that really entailed. And this was back in 2013. So I think it was around that time. And so then God opened up the avenues to go to all those places, and do whatever I needed to do. Deposit something, release something, call something into being, whatever it might have been, connect with people, relate to people, because it was all relationally orientated. Yes. That was the key. I wanted, and then when I discharged my responsibility, and there's still an ongoing responsibility to legislate for its ongoing fulfillment and whatever, but I am not living in the US, and I'm not responsible for doing all that. Right. So, but I do have a heart for it, and I do want to encourage people to participate in it. Yeah, so eventually in 2014, I think I came to Atlanta. I went up the eastern seaboard. So I went up to Maryland and right up into Toronto. That was one trip. And then the next year I went up into the Northwest, up in Seattle, and in the whole of Washington, and into Oregon, and did some stuff up there, which is still an ongoing relational connection I have with people there. And then I came back to Atlanta and did something there on the way before I came home, and sort of God engineered that. And then the next year I went to the Southwest, down into San Diego and LA and Phoenix. And that was it. So I'd done four corners, connected. And the part of the whole engaging God thing is it connects people. Yes. And what we're looking to do, part of our mandate, is to connect people relationally, so that those people then can begin to engage together to see. That's why the outside sort of boundary of it is connected. So they're all arrows that are connected relationally. So the Northwest connected with the Southeast, and the Northeast connected with the Southwest. And then the boundaries are Southeast to Southwest and Northeast to Northwest. So they're all sort of forming a grid, which was the sort of connections. And eventually that took on a different perspective, in that it developed into a crown. And so by the time I'd done the four corners, I asked God, well, I asked God, well, is there anything else you want me to do? All right. And I found, and sometimes you just ask. I mean, I didn't intend to ask him that. It wasn't, my spirit asked it. My soul didn't, because I didn't want to do anything else. Right. I thought I've done it. Thank you very much. That's all I need to do. I never really thought about anything else. So I did it. And then I found myself asking, well, is there anything else? And God said, yeah, I want you to engage the heart of the nation, and the spine of the nation, and the heart of the nation. Okay. So I was like, oh, what do you mean by that? And generally in these things, I don't go out there and then try and engineer what happens. I wait for God to inspire people to connect to me, and then we see what God does. So at that point, had God said this, he said, I want you to engage the spine and the heart of the nation. Someone emailed me and said, we have a mandate for you to come here to the heart of the nation.
Oh, really? Okay.
So I thought, oh, okay.
Yeah.
When do you want me to come? Oh, we want you to come, in September. So I'd been to, in March, April, I was in San Diego in the Southwest. And then, I had no intention of traveling anywhere else that year. But then this came up and it was just like, oh, okay, I better respond to that.
Sure, yes.
And then as I responded, so, okay, yes, I believe this is a real mandate. And then I got invited to come to Dallas and Fort Worth area, and then to Kansas, and then eventually to Nebraska. So that really was the spine of the nation and into the heart of the nation. And once I'd said yes, then God opened the whole thing up and said, now I want you to do a national summit in the heart of the nation and call people from all the other areas to come.
Okay.
So I was sort of like, oh, I didn't sign up for that. It's like, but then that's how God works. Jehovah's sneaky. He gets you to say yes to something, and then all of a sudden what you said yes to expands into this much bigger thing. So sort of, okay. So I promised to go to the heart of the nation, and then it was like, well, what am I supposed to do? So literally I said, well, I contacted the people that invited me, and I said, look, what do you think about this? And they said, oh, great. That's exactly what it would be a great thing to do. Now, the heart of the nation was in the middle of nowhere. Basically, I mean, it was a place, but it was not a place that was very easy to get to. No airport, the other. So all of a sudden, it's like, okay, come to Kearney, Nebraska, and we're going to have a national summit on Saturday, the 24th of September. Blah, blah. And, how do you get there? Oh, I don't know. I don't know how to get there. I mean, I drove there. Well, I didn't drive there. Someone drove me there from Wichita. So it was like I drove. So I just ended up going up there. But people traveled from all over.
Oh, wonderful.
People travel. I mean, there was about 120 people turned up.
Okay.
And we did, court cases, legislative, governmental things as a national thing to help create the relationships that would then facilitate what that original blueprint was for, which was to establish government. And by that time, I had this sort of blueprint thing for the crown, and so because God sort of develops things and you sort of get a bigger perspective on things as you go forward. And so the crown dynamic by that time had sort of unveiled. So it was like, okay, God wants to establish benches of 3 governmentally around the nation to connect and intersect. And out of that, there were a number of people who are still meeting, and they're still meeting. They're meeting as a bench in a outworking of that. And they're sort of operating governmentally in Washington, D.C., although they don't all live there, but in a sense where the heart of the government is within the nation, to look at what the heart is for the spiritual government within the nation. Now, this is obviously not a hierarchical thing. It's a relational thing. And, I'm not responsible for all that, but I do feel, a continued connection to God outworking it.
Yes.
And then, I have gone into other nations and taken the same heart to establish government. That's my thing. I want to help people establish governmental foundations and begin to bring the kingdom into their frameworks, really. So, I've been to New Zealand and South Africa and other places that have taken the same basic, here, God is calling me here to help in some way catalyze or stir or encourage people to take responsibility for their own areas and then do whatever they need to do. So that's part of what I feel inspired to do. It's about inspiring others and encouraging others and supporting others in the process, which is why the whole Engaging God program thing is really about equipping people to do these things for themselves, not to do it for them. It's all about helping people to hear God for themselves, helping people to understand legislation and government and all the things you need to do, how to make a law and how to, use legislation governmentally in heaven, how to be seated in heavenly places, all those sort of things. It's all part of the process, really, of equipping people to do what they need to do. And I'm a fellow, journeyer, if you like. I'm on the same journey, and I want to walk that journey out with people. And sometimes we intersect and cross paths, and I can help in that relational thing. And sometimes those relations are ongoing, and sometimes it's like I've done what I needed to do, and great, but I mean, I'm sort of still in looking to do that in the UK in some sense. We're working regionally and connecting with people in the UK, again, just to provide support. It's a bit easier in the UK because I don't have to fly as far. And actually some people can come to us, because they can come to us because they can see actually, how do you do this? Or how do you not do it? It's like, because we're not experts, we're still learning, but at least they can see this is how this works in an ecclesia setting or in a ministry setting, because we obviously have different ministries working here, working together. So, people do come here and we spend, a few days with them, and they ask us questions, and they can look at what we do, and, just to try and help, and that occasionally happens. We had a I think 5 or 6 people came in December. We got Justin Abrahams coming in February to just look at what we do, in terms of how we engage the community, how we're out working an ecclesia from a new way of doing it. Yes. Because it's, a lot of people have not established it as that basic foundation. They do ministry or they have things, but they're not actually necessarily out working it in that way. And I believe that's what God has called to be able to do this. It's like the manifold wisdom of God is made known through the ecclesia. Now, I'm not saying that's an old order ecclesia by any means, or the religious institutions out there. I'm talking about the gathering of people to a blueprint who relationally are committed to outworking God's purpose together. That's what a real ecclesia is. It has a foundation of a bench of 3 who then release people to be living stones within whatever God's blueprint design is. And every blueprint design for ecclesia is all different.
Okay.
So they may look as if they're completely different animals. One can look like an elephant and one can look like a mouse, but they're still an actual blueprint of an ecclesia. They're still an animal, even if it might look as if they're not, it still is. And that's how we should see it. It shouldn't be clones and everyone looks the same and we've got these franchises all over the place. It should be, what is God calling this group of people to be? Yes. What does that blueprint look like? Rather than, it's a formula and we're all going to be, Cell Church, or we're all going to be Purpose-Driven Church, or we're all going to be Bethel Church, or we're all going to be this church, or, all the different, because it's all like, okay, well, this works in a place, so we'll try and then make it work somewhere else. Rather than, well, what's God calling us to do here? What's the vision for here, so that we can have that specific blueprint, which is designed for that group of people. And that is what will be successful ultimately, because everyone will find a place in that. But it takes time, obviously, to do that. And if you're starting from scratch, it's probably a bit easier than trying to transition something out of an old to a new. But bottom line is, even if you start from scratch, you've got to make sure you do not function with an old mindset within it, because it's so easy to slip back into old ways of thinking and old ways of doing things. And from a new perspective, everything needs to be established in heaven first. Okay. Then it needs to be outworked on earth under an open heaven and through people whose lives are gateways of heaven, working together relationally. Okay. And everyone hearing God for themselves in that open heaven and not being covered or governed by others or ruled from a hierarchical structure, but all being equipped to actually be fulfilling their destiny in God. And I think that's the key. So we have people who will come, and we are always looking for new ways of equipping people. This is why this year we're doing conferences and intensives And, we're live streaming them so people who can't get here physically can engage that. So we're really looking to try and just do whatever we can to help sons of God arise and take their place and be seated in heavenly places, and then get a blueprint, outwork a blueprint, because we haven't got enough. In fact, we haven't got hardly any.
Okay.
When I look around the world, how many new order ecclesias that are operating under heavenly, how many do I see? Not many. Hardly any at all. If I obviously don't know everything that's going on, so there may be lots that I don't know of, but there aren't thousands and thousands and thousands out there, which we're going to need. We're going to need a lot of places to receive a harvest, equip the harvest, release the harvest, so that harvest can reach the next harvest, and we can have, I believe, 3 generations working together, which has always been God's intention, to have generational government. It only operated once through Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob.
Okay.
And even now in the New Testament, you read, God is the God of Abraham, Isaac, and because it was something that he identified with, because it was a covenantal expression of blessed to be a blessing, to be a place where this is going to be a blessing to all the families of the earth when 3 generations work together governmentally. And it hasn't worked since that. You could have had Moses passing the baton to Joshua and then walking it out with him, because I don't necessarily believe in passing the baton as much as working together with the same baton. So I've done my bit, no, you get on with it. No, actually, let's walk together and let you take it further, and I'm going to be here to support you and give you what you need as encouragement, and then you can do the next to the next generation. And I believe we're in a place right now where we need to reach a generation who will then reach the next generation, so we can all work together.
Yes.
I believe that's God's desire, to see his government on earth as it is in heaven. And then I think we'll start to see the restoration of all things really start to move at a pace, because there's a framework in which it can be outworked, rather than, every move of God defending it and not passing on to the next, and then everyone starts again all the time.
All over again.
So there's never been the momentum that's coming where 2 generations walk together and then reaches the next generation who walks together.
Yes.
And I think that is God's intention, because I think it is on a large scale a sense of representation of heaven, but we've not really seen it. Now I believe this is where we've got the opportunity of being ready to receive a harvest and equip that harvest as harvesters for the next harvest and walk together with them. I think we're at that point where this next generation, and we're not talking about young people, we're talking about whoever gets saved and brought into the promised land, rather than wandering around the wilderness.
Oh my goodness.
So, come out of Egypt and go straight into the promised land, which is actually pretty much what they should have done, with a little bit of a journey, but they didn't. And then they took 40 years to do it, and we've just missed one 40-year generational call for this. And so God has established another generational call, and we need to respond to it. We need to be the Joshuas and Calebs of this Joshua generation, that are willing to take the next in.
Yes. Have you heard of Miles Monroe?
I've heard of the name. Yeah, I've seen. I mean, he died in a plane crash or something, didn't he? Yeah.
In 2013, July 2013, he had a prophetic word that he gave to the church, and essentially, there's a change or a shift coming. And I believe the shift that he was talking about is the shift that we're experiencing now, because his prophecy was that many people will leave here, going home, and everyone has, pretty much, a lot of people have, simply to make room for the change that the Lord was preparing us for. And since that time, he says, he gave the prophecy in September 2013. And he said, before 2014, all this will have been started in terms of removing people, not necessarily ungodly, but people of God, so that there won't be any kind of resistance to the move that he's bringing forth. Yeah. So I don't know if that's relevant, but.
Well, there was a lot going on at that period of time. I mean,
Okay.
2012 seemed to be a very significant point. And then 3 years until 2015, a lot of things were starting to move and shift. 2012 was the end of the first or the last calendar, if you like, of the circle of the deep, all the constellations moving around. That was the whole end of the Mayan calendar. You have Ian Clayton coming out talking about this is the end of the apostolic order and the beginning of the order of Melchizedek governmentally. You had Mark Verkler actually publishing a book, Heaven Touching Earth, and has a new reformation of the church, which put supernatural things of heaven and the angelic realm on an open. This is the next reformation, that we have to re-embrace what we should always be. So those things really took place. Yes. And he actually, just like the original Reformation with Martin Luther, he pinned his 95 thesis onto the door of the church in Gutenberg or wherever it was. And basically this, Mark Verkler said, I'm looking for 95 leaders around the world to endorse this as a recommendation of a new reformation for the church. And I was one of those who signed it.
Okay.
I read it in those, this is 2012. I'd had my encounters in heaven in 2010. So this was just like, did it go far enough? Probably not, but it was good. It was a good foundation because it had support from wide streams across the body of Christ. And I think that was a significant thing. And God spoke to me in 2012 and says, you got 3 years to get ready for a new season. And then August the 8th, 2015, you had the end of a 40-year generational period and the beginning of a new one. And that was from the prophecy that Bob Jones gave in August the 8th, 1975, that there was going to be a billion-fold harvest.
Right.
And for 40 years, those that responded to that were looking to create a harvest of young people rather than preparing a generation to be mentors for the harvest. When the mentors are there, the harvest can come in to the storehouses and be equipped. And that's sort of the illustration of Joseph. Joseph comes out of the prison, he's out of obscurity, suddenly he's on the world stage, and he's receiving a harvest of 20%. There's a huge harvest, but 20% of it is brought into the storehouse, and is then the whole world comes to there. So it's described, because they have the grain when the rest of the world was in famine. So there was a sense where that is what I believe took place. And in August the 8th, 2015, that date was 888. If you add together August the 8th, the 8th day of the 8th month, 2015, 215 makes 8. And actually in August that year, there were 3 days that did the same thing.
Okay.
So you had the, whatever it was the 17th, I think, which was 7, 8, 1 and 7, and I think you then had 2 and 25th as well, or 26th, which was 2 and 6. So all those dates added up to the triple new beginnings of this, governmental shift for a new season. So we're now getting up to 2.5 years or so into that new season. Are we any more ready to receive a harvest? Because the point is, we've got to get ready as Joshua and Caleb's, who are willing to take that harvest into their inheritance, which is beyond the veil. So that's why I'm looking for those who are willing to say, yeah, I'm willing to get in a blueprint from heaven and start something on the earth. And what I've seen in the spirit of how that should start is small groups of people, getting together relationally, getting a blueprint, establishing a governmental foundation of a Venture 3 and a Venture 7, and then relationally getting ready for the harvest, preparing for it, starting to, in heaven, call it in, or do what you need to do, but be then ready for God to accelerate it and to him to actually increase it.
Okay.
But so many people are waiting for someone else to do it. You know, I think they know they're called really, but they're just feeling I'm not a Bible teacher, or I'm not a pastor, or I'm not this. And actually, this is why the phrase "God would rather have an amateur in the new than a professional in the old" comes in. Because when 10 people come together and just say, yeah, we're here, God, we want to receive a blueprint from you, you know, or even if it's one person, and then they say, I want to call these people together and we want to, you know, it isn't about numbers. See, part of the problem with the Western church is it's all about, well, how many people have you got? Right. You know, and it's just, and the pressure is, well, you're not very successful. You only got 5 people, or you only got 10 people. Well, actually, that's the point. Get the foundation right relationally without all the pressure of having to look after 50, 100 or people, and establish foundations that will take the weight of what God adds. Mm-hmm. And then God, I believe, will add 100 overnight. So then you'll have 110 people. So you've then got 10 groups of 10 who can then become the foundation for the next group that come in. So then you can have another 110 people times 100. You know, so it all increases, you see. I mean, it's all, you start with 1, you then can have 10, and then you can have 100, and then you can have 1,000. And actually, we can reach the world in a very short period of time. If I was to reach one person a year, and that person were to reach one person a year, then that we could reach the world in 32 years from just discipling one person a year each, compounded up. But if we start with 1,000 people, we can do it in a few years. Okay. So it's possible to really do something, but we've got to have the foundations ready. And I really am convinced that God wants for people to say, yes, give us a blueprint and we'll set the foundations. And then we're going to be waiting and trusting in what you do to bring the increase to that, so that it can begin to be the place where the harvest is received. You see, if you look at it from those terms, you know, you can have 4 or 5 churches of 10,000 people, and they can reach 10,000 people every year. But actually, that will take a long, long time to reach the world, because all they're doing is doubling. It's addition, rather than multiplication. But if you had 10 people who received 100 people, and then you've got then 11 groups effectively of 10 people, and each one of them were then able to receive 100 people, and then each one of them now can receive 100. It doesn't take that long for the kingdom to fill the earth, and the glory of God to fill the earth, and the mount of the house of the Lord to be raised up, because we will have a foothold in which we're expanding the kingdom to fill the earth. Yes. But someone's got to start. You know, and I believe God is calling people to start. Just get those foundations, get the relationship, establish how to hear God, how to do the governmental things, work together, learn, practice, without the pressure of, well, you got to look after all these people and they're all pressurizing you for this, that, and the other. Just actually build, and it can be done in a home. You see, that's what happened with the early church. They started in a home. You know, and because it's relational and it's family, and you see they ate together, and God added to them daily, see, because they were the unit that could be the foundation for increase. You know, and I believe that's where we are right now. And you know, I want to see people say, "Hey, here I am. You know, I'm not equipped. I don't feel able, ready, but I'm willing." And that's all you need. Someone who says, I'm willing, and God will equip, and God will enable, and God will empower, God will envision, and things can move forward. All right. You know, but we need those people. So I'm calling for those people to respond. You know?
Well, during one of the activations, your activation, in fact, I had a vision in which I saw 2 benches. One was facing windows, and people filed in and sat down. And I couldn't count, but it was more than 5. And then a second bench that was positioned to the back of the first bench, people walked in again and sat down on that. And that was it. And this was, in fact, last night. But during an activation, one of the lessons we were working with through programming, legislation, in fact. Yeah.
Awesome. Yeah.
So I think the Lord is speaking, but I guess I need to hear this to take it seriously and take a stand.
Yeah, absolutely. And, it really isn't about being an expert. That's the great thing. It's about being willing and relationally engaged and growing in relationship with God and man, because that's what Jesus did. Jesus grew in wisdom and stature with God and man, and he is calling each of us to begin to do that. Joshua and Caleb were in their 80s.
Okay. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, they weren't young spring chickens. They were in their 80s, but what was Caleb's spirit? God said, "This is a man with a different spirit."
Okay.
Because he had hey, I'm 80, but bring it on. I'm willing to go in and out to war. I'm willing to do what it takes. Give me the high ground. In other words, show me where the best place is, where all the giants are. I'm going to take it. So that was the attitude, because they knew God. That was the key.
Yes.
They had seen the land. They believed God. They had an intimacy with God that the others didn't have. And that was what enabled them then to take things on in a new way, in a new dimension.
Okay.
And God is looking for the same sort of people who are willing to say yes, no matter how old they are.
Yeah.
It's not precluding young people. It's also not precluding older people either. And older people have more time and more availability often to be able to invest, whereas younger people are often investing in their families, investing in their future, and don't necessarily have the time to invest in developing the relationships with others that are needed for this level of foundation. So a lot of it is older people who are willing to say yes, and they do have the wisdom, some worldly wisdom in a sense, to bring into the mix, but ultimately it's about getting wisdom out of heaven and establishing things in heaven. Okay. And I believe, that's what God is wanting to do. Is calling people to say yes.
All right.
Yeah, and he's got blueprints and mandates from heaven to release, but someone's got to say, yeah, give me one. I'll receive one. And then once you've got a blueprint, then things can start to manifest around that blueprint governmentally.
Mm-hmm.
And if it takes 5 years of 10 people building relationship, then spend the 5 years. If it takes 10 years, spend the 10 years, because it isn't about growing big. Mm-hmm. It's about getting the foundation strong enough relationally to be able then to see God's kingdom come. And this is where people get itchy feet and sort of, well, we're not growing. It's like the purpose isn't to grow. The purpose is to have a foundation.
Yes,
the purpose is to dig the footings deep, to make sure you've got the biggest foundation you need. Because you can put a lot on a really good foundation. You can't put a lot on a foundation that is not built on solid rock, if you like. So I think we're at that point where I believe God is wanting people to say yes and invest in that for however long it takes, because then God will bring the increase. The harvest is, and reaping a harvest is God's business. We just have to be willing to receive it. Who went out in Matthew 13 when he was talking about the parable of the sower, and then eventually went on to talk about other parables? Who went out? He sent out angels to go and bring the harvest in. So in a sense, we've spent most of our time trying to develop techniques to get a harvest unsuccessfully. Definitely. The best techniques that were done, which did bring people, were those that were relational and often on small group basis. So I think there were some good principles in there. They just became formulaic and lost the relationship on the way, and then became a formula for what other people should do rather than a principle that would help other people to get their own blueprint vision from God. So unfortunately, the body is like that. Here's something that works. Let's all try and copy it.
Yeah.
Yeah. When it worked because it was given as a mandate for that group of people, not necessary for the next group or the next group or the next group. We tend to have the franchise mentality of this works, let's try that. And I've done it, been there, done it, got the hat and t-shirt with the desire for a harvest, with a desire to be ready to receive or to be able to reach people, just not the relationship and the this is what it is for this group of people, you know, to establish. You know, we tried cell church, you know, we tried G12 or whatever, and purpose-driven church and whatever other thing that was out there that offered a hope of growing, because we wanted to reach people. The desire was right, just the methodology wasn't. You know, we need to engage God, and he will give the blueprint to relational people, you know, and I think that's all we need to be. Foundations, you know, then God will increase. You know, we spend too much time trying to work out how to get an increase. You know, and that's God's business. If we're ready, then he'll add to us.
Sure. Yeah.
You know?
God gave the increase. Well, thank you.
Okay. All right. Well, that was a sort of a long introduction, but there we go.
It's okay.
I'll throw it open for any other things you want to talk about.
I've got a quick question, and this is actually, I'm bringing it from a friend of mine who I've known for a long, long time, and this was about a situation that she had. This happened about 30 years ago. This is back in the 80s, and we both used to work in the same bakery together, and we went to the same church. She and her husband at the time were very involved with prayer ministry and deliverance and the whole 9 yards. That was not where Joe and I were called, but our friends were. And so we're at work one day, and she tells me that she was home because we always had, you know, different days off, and she happened to be home, and they lived in the country. They lived in Florida. This was in Florida. Lived in the country, out in the middle of nowhere. No real immediate neighbors or anything like that. And they had a large piece of property, and it was gated in terms of it just had like ranch fencing around it, and then their property was gated because they were in the middle of nowhere. And so she happened to be home by herself, and she hears singing, and she's in the middle of nowhere, and she looks out of her window, and walking down her driveway are people. She said the best way to describe them is that they looked like they were Amish. And they were walking towards her house, and they were singing. Well, she got really, really frightened, and told them to leave in Jesus' name, and they did. And so she then went to go to the phone to call her husband to tell Brett what had happened. And when she picked up the phone was dead. Now, it had been working earlier. All of a sudden, the phone was dead. Well, then she was really freaked out. And so she told me about this had happened, and she tells me about it a couple of days later, and I'm like, ooh, that sounds really weird, strange. And she's always been of the opinion that, you know, this was a demonic force coming against them because of the nature of the ministry they were in, that she rebuked it, you know, the whole 9 yards and that. And so we just sort of left it at that and just said, boy, that was really weird, you know, that was in the 80s. So we had our meeting with you last week, and we're talking about time travel, you know, and going back and forth. And I'm sitting there thinking, like, now I wonder if those weren't really demonic, but that was Amish people from the past coming. But of course, she didn't know that. And so I'm chatting this back and forth in Messenger and Facebook, because they're in Florida, we're here. And I'm saying, you know, I'm remembering the situation that you told me about. I said, and I'm wondering, was it maybe not what you thought it was? Was that this was, you know, well, originally I thought she said that they were hooded. And she said, no, they had the Amish clothing. I said, well, I'm just wondering, maybe it was not what you thought it was. And she said, well, she said, you know, but I told them to leave in Jesus' name, and they did. And I said, well, I would think that any spiritual being, good, bad, or otherwise, if you commanded it to leave in Jesus' name, it would have to obey you if you knew your authority. So yeah, that would be the logical thing, that they would leave. And she said, well, what about the telephone? I said, well, I don't think there's really, I said, the whole disturbance in the electromagnetic field, I said, I don't see where that would really, that's very possible. And I mentioned to her about David Van Couvering, who he interrupts electrical systems when he walks in the room. I said, and this is a strong believer. I said, and he's not doing anything. All he does is show up. But because, you know, of just what either he's been through, whatever, he can stop clocks. He can make vending machines malfunction. He can make elevators function. He's not doing anything. He just walks in there and it happens. I said, so yeah, it seems to me very logical that there would have been a disturbance in, you know, the electromagnetic field in a supernatural encounter. And if the phone goes dead, the phone goes dead. That seems really logical. I said, but I have a friend in England. I said, let me ask him. I said, because I was saying to him, look, I said, he's had a lot more experiences than I have. I said, so I would rather talk to somebody who has possibly experienced some of these things as opposed to me just saying, hey, well, you know, I think. And so I was slowly broaching some things with her in terms of where, you know, we're sort of going, which then she then tells me, she goes, well, you know, she goes, we get feathers all the time, you know, with angelic encounters, because, you know, we see into both realms. And she said, but, you know, we don't really have anybody, you know, that we can tell these things to. I said, don't feel bad. I said, we're into a lot of stuff that we can't talk to about either. But now she's totally convinced, she really believes that the Lord told her that this was a demonic manifestation. And that's her story, and she's sticking to it, and that's fine with me. I'm beginning to really wonder, was this not necessarily the demonic? Was it even someone, because there's no Amish in Florida. So for people like that to show up, that, you know, that was really, it's not like, hey, they live next door and they walk down your driveway. I'm beginning to think maybe he was sending them somebody either from the past or clothed in a way that would not be frightening. I mean, how frightening are Amish people? Not at all. Type of thing that I just said, I don't know that was necessarily what it was. But I told her, I said, but I'll ask Mike, and even about the electromagnetic interference, because to me, that seems logical that could very easily happen. I said, let me ask, I said, because he's got more experience in a lot of things that I have. I want to see if he's ever had anything like this, and I'll let you know what he says.
Okay. Well, that's an interesting one, isn't it?
So yeah. You're on the hot seat.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I would, in anything like that, our soul can react to the situation in fear because we're unfamiliar with that type of thing. I always look for clues in the symbols of what happened. And, you know, I've never seen any demons coming singing. You know, singing is in the Bible is usually an expression of praise or worship or honoring to God. So even the fact that they were coming singing seemed to me to indicate that this was not a demonic manifestation, but a manifestation of something which was trying to reveal something to them in that way. And if they're obviously open to spiritual things, then it may be that, you know, they were being called to be forerunners for something, you know, that we're now into now, you know. And then, you know, in terms of, again, yes, you can definitely have manifestations of spiritual things which affect the natural realm. We've had a number of them in which portals have opened and actually things in this natural realm have actually really been affected by it. So I have no issue with a telephone potentially not working because of a manifestation of supernatural power, or even cloud of witnesses, or whatever. But also, what's the symbol of it? See, for me is, here's something supernatural happening, and here's something naturally stopping. So you have, here's the new coming, and here's the old not working. So this is the way you're used to doing things in this way, but now that is going to stop. So I always look at yes, this may have happened, but what is God trying to convey through it? And what are the symbols that actually you can look at? So I look at that and think, yeah, this is the earthly telephone. Actually, that stops when the supernatural dimension of let's say the cloud of witness is coming with messages from God, or it could even be angelic messengers, because they're still seeing feathers. Where do they think those feathers are coming from? It's like, hey, those angels are probably still trying to say, hey, we're trying to communicate with you. But you're actually seeing this as the negative when actually it was the positive. So, I would encourage them just to be open again and say, hey, God, look, if you were trying to do something that we misconstrued, we're open for you to do it again in whatever that looks like today. Because we've moved on a fair bit since the 80s. And now some of the things like that would be interpreted slightly differently, I think. If I saw a whole lot of Amish people coming up my drive singing, I would be inclined to go out and say, hey, why are you here? And actually, if they weren't physical people, but were a physical manifestation of something spiritual, then you're soon going to interact with it to find out, and it may be, that God is continue to want to unveil things like that. And there's certainly the feathers are an indication that there is angelic activity, and things can happen like that. We have a portal in our building that when we had revival meetings and things in 2011 was open, and there was lots of manifestation of the angelic, but also fragrances, smells, all sorts of things that seemed to were coming through that portal, which were affecting the building. And when the revival meters ended, God told me to assign 2 sentinel angels to guard the portal, which I did. And some people who come into the building who are quite sensitive get to that point because it's right on the top of the stairs, because we meet upstairs and we've got a whole lot of things downstairs. So it's people has to go past that point to come into where we meet. And some people are sensitive to it and they're aware of something. It's actually the warmest spot in the whole building. And our heating sort of packed up last week. And it was cold except for there. Well, downstairs is okay because we've all got individual heaters. But the main hall had this big gas heater thing. And I walked upstairs and you can feel tangibly 5 or 6 degrees higher than the rest of the building, whatever it is. So it's like there is something that is actually affecting the natural realm from that. Now, the other day, well, about a few weeks ago, I walked out to go upstairs and there was this smell, like really bad smell. Well, it was like a farmyard smell. It was like, it felt like a whole herd of cows had marched through the building and left deposits everywhere. That's what it felt. And it smelled really strong, like really strong. And I thought, am I the only one smelling this? So I went to, can you smell that smell? And they were downstairs in reception. They were like, well, yeah, there is a, but they took 2 steps on the stairs and all of a sudden it was just like, bang, this smell, really, really in their face smell. And it was upstairs. People were coming out of the main hall during our day center, getting to the top of the stairs. And they were like, what is this smell? And it was like, it wasn't in the day center. It wasn't anywhere else. It was on the stairs where this portal is. So I'm like, wow, this is weird. So I thought, well, I need to do something about this. So I thought, well, I'm going to engage, and sort of stop it, But then I thought, well, actually, what might this be? Is this something negative? Because it smelled bad. Now, we have some pretty bad smelling people come in sometimes who live rough, and they are extremely bad sometimes. But this was worse than that. This was it was a different type of smell than that. This was definitely a farmyard smell. So then I thought, oh, maybe this is something to do with the ox, and what the ox face of God. And what would that be indicating? Because it's weird, isn't it? I mean, it doesn't seem to have a sort of a purpose or a rhyme or reason, but actually it was there. So, the next day, come in, it'd gone. No residue of the smell at all. So it wasn't like, we had a drain somewhere which was blocked, whatever, because there's no water on this side of the building at all. All the utilities are on the other side of the building. So it didn't seem that. So I forgot about it. And then a few days later, I'm not normally in on Fridays, and the same thing happened on the Friday. And it was like, but it was even more intense, and it was filling the rest of the building from this thing. So the other two of the Benja 3 who were here, they took some of our singing bowl things, and they started to produce some sounds, and the smell dissipated, and we've not had it since. But I think it wasn't a natural smell. Because there was no way a herd of cows would have actually been in the building, so it wasn't. But it smelled exactly like that. So what was God saying? Was it the enemy? Because a portal's a portal. It's what comes through it is, and that's why it's guarded, because potentially this portal could have been used for the wrong thing. So we were like, was this something negative? Was this the enemy trying to do something? Well, okay, we played these sounds and it went. We haven't had it since. But I have a feeling it was much more. This was something to do with the sense of the ox, and the season we're coming into needs a prophetic, or the oracles of God, in terms of the eternal weight of the word of God, needs to be engaged. And sometimes God does things which are really odd, they just are, it's just, they're just weird, they're odd. There doesn't seem to be any sense or rhyme or reason in it, but God has a purpose in it. So I treasure those things. I hold them in my heart, and I'm sort of, okay, God, were you trying to get our attention? What were you trying to say? If this was the manifestation of the ox, what was that about? So I've been engaging with it, and I've sensed some things as a result of that, because it really got my attention. You couldn't help but get your attention, because it was really, really in your face smell. Now, when we've had that portal open in 2011, we had fire smells. I mean, we had almost, people thought there was a fire in the building. That was how real the smell of smoke fire was. People were going around looking, the fire attendants were looking, they went around making sure that there wasn't a fire, because it felt so intensely real that this was sort of a fire in the building. Well, it was on the top of the stairs, was just that this smell was first perceived. And again, it was like, well, was that a bad thing? No, actually it wasn't. It was to do with the fire of God. It was to do with the fire of God's presence. It was to do with the fire of what happens when you lay on the altar. I mean, it was, it was very much in tune with what God was doing, because fire was sort of, in a sense, one of the key elements that we had when we were going through those meetings and stuff. God's presence was there like fire. People were experienced being burning fire and being purified in fire, and the fire of God's presence was there, So I don't have any problem with some spiritual manifestations actually having a physical effect on that people can actually sense, and this wasn't well, I'm spiritually sensitive and I can smell this. Everyone smelt it, it really did. This was just so real that everyone smelt it, and no one knew where it came from. So yeah, definitely. But I sense from what you're telling me that this was not a demonic manifestation.
Yeah. When she told me about it in the 80s, I was like, oh yeah, spooky. But it's just, as we've been going through things, I'm thinking no, I don't think that was it at all. Now, I've not broached her to think about, hey, these may have been Amish from the past who were coming to visit you. I thought that may be pushing the envelope a little bit. But to say, because I even said to her, I said, look, angels can show up in any type of garb. They're not always going to, and she, and we're definitely in agreement with that. And we were talking about different things where where we believe were angelic encounters, and they certainly weren't there with, with the robes and the wings and the whole 9 yards. They came across looking as normal people. And I without using Dr. O by name, I said, look, I said, I'm familiar with someone else that, he had a manifestation, and for him it was like the first time he saw wisdom, and he's like, what is this woman doing in my room? And he was rebuking her in the name of Jesus and telling her to leave. And it took a while for, several times for her to show up to finally say, wait a minute, there's something else is going on here. And it's like, oh, okay, this is wisdom. But because it didn't look like what he had expected. And so without going into that much detail, I just said, hey, a lot of times it can show things, they can show up in a way that does not fit our expectation. And yeah, I said, I really believe if you tell any being to leave in the name of Jesus, they're going to obey you because you have the authority, but it may not be. I said, I'm just thinking out loud. And she's like, well, I'm just going to go with what God told me. But I said, look, I'll ask Mike, and especially about the phone, in terms of that. I said, but I don't see any problem with a supernatural occurrence disrupting what happens in the natural world. I said, it seems very, very logical because of what changes in the atmosphere. So I will be chatting with her later on today and say, okay.
Well, you do have quite a number of biblical precedents for it. I mean, you have Elisha and his servant, and you have the fiery chariots and horses, and that actually stopped them being attacked. So there was a physical manifestation which was spiritual, which stopped an attack. You have a number of things. I mean, you have, in a sense, Peter, James, John, and Jesus on a mountain.
And they saw Elijah,
Moses, and Elijah.
Yeah. So
I mean, that must have been pretty weird. And it could have appeared, we got ghosts.
Yeah.
In that sense. And you also had like 500 people or so coming out of the grave after the resurrection that started walking around Jerusalem. Well, that would have been pretty weird and spooky.
Yeah.
But it wasn't demonic, even though they were the spirits of dead people. But they were actually resurrected. So they must have had a physical body, which was a new resurrection physical body like Jesus had. So it's a one-liner, isn't it? Thrown in there. But can you imagine? It must have freaked a lot of people out.
Oh, yeah.
But it was clearly God.
Yeah. Especially if it was somebody who'd been dead for a long period of time, because it doesn't say just the people that just recently got thrown in the grave came back. It just says people came out. Well, if it'd been somebody who'd been dead a long period of time, that would have been very, very what in the world is going on here? So I mean, I'll be chatting with her today, and I just said, especially about the electromagnetic thing, but I just said to her, okay, you do that. I said, but I'm not necessarily sure it's what you thought it was. So
absolutely. I very often have problems with microphones that just start to manifest because of a power dimension.
Yeah.
And there's nothing wrong with them. They're just reacting to me. And I've drained batteries before. Before it's just, and all of a sudden it's like, well, that's a new battery. And it's just like, well, it's gone. And there's something that's actually affecting the physical realm, which is a spiritual thing. And definitely, David Vancouver stops and starts all sorts of equipment, but he can actually see into it.
Yeah.
He sees what's behind a piece of equipment in such that he can actually fix it or do it without even touching it.
Yeah.
So there's definitely is that interaction between the physical and the natural realm, and this realm is held together by, the voice of his power, holding everything together in tension.
Yeah.
But the main thing would be, okay, let's say it wasn't a demonic manifestation, and you are having manifestation with angels, or you're having feathers. Well, do you think they might still wanting to be communicating with you? Do they have a message? Is Jesus trying to get through to you, but you're sort of not receiving it because you're thinking it's from the wrong source?
Well, in terms of, she said, that they see both the demonic and the angelic realm. And the whole thing about the feathers, they don't think that there's anything wrong with that. No, they believe that that's interaction with angels on the good side. So that's not the problem. You know, that's not an issue there. And it's really sort of funny because when we were down there, not this year for Thanksgiving, but the year before, now it really didn't work out, but none of that came up. But evidently this has been something that's going on. And she made the point, she said, hey, we've had experiences, but we just haven't had anyone that we could tell anyone about it. And I said, well, welcome to the club. I said, we're in the same thing. And I said, there's just some things you just can't talk about because it's just not going to be understood. And like I said, I didn't even get into the whole thing about time travel with her. And
stepping into heaven being open,
or the fact that you go to hell and you preach to your relatives. Yeah, I mean,
just angels coming here, is it? You know?
Yeah, and so I just told her, I said, let me just bounce this off of Mike. I said, he's got a lot more experience than I have to see if he's ever heard of something like this. I said, because from his background. So I will be chatting into her today and letting her know.
And I would be encouraging her just to go back to God and say, look, if I didn't quite understand what went on, can you now show me what you were trying to communicate to me?
Yeah.
What was this about? Just to be open.
Yeah.
Just in case. Okay, well, you know, because if it was God trying to get something through, you don't want to miss it.
Yeah.
Even 30 years, 40 years later, you don't want to miss it because, you know, hey, a generation has passed perhaps.
Yeah.
Or is coming to pass. Maybe God is saying, hey, I want to give you the opportunity of it re-embracing what I was trying to show you then.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I'll let her know and see what she says.
Awesome. Excellent. Okay. All right. Anyone else got anything? Got a few minutes left. Nope. Okay. All right.